Hi, and welcome back to WVU Extension Today. I'm your host, Joel Brown. Today we're going to go down on the sugar bush and learn all about maple syrup production. Let's head over and visit our friend Dave McGill to learn more.
Maple syrup's been around since indigenous people, so it's been around hundreds and maybe thousands of years. Maple syrup, extends from people having thousands of taps, 7,000, I know, or more taps in these trees, and you'll see those later, but to just a family with a couple trees, they tap them and boil it down. They'll hang a bucket right on the tree and just collect that way versus a system like this is more advanced and more sophisticated, and it produces more. Finding sugar maples in your woods is not too difficult. Generally, they have a smoother gray bark, and it's kind of mottled on the surface, some little kind of warty in some cases. The small ones look different than the big ones, of course. They change as they age. But as the trees get bigger, they'll still retain their smooth kind of gray bark, but they'll have these long kind of plates that peel up on one side generally, and those are fairly thick plates. We'll see some out here. The most productive ones are the sugar maples, but red maple as well. It has a good sugar content, good sap flow. All the maples can be tapped. Even box elder, which is a type of a maple, not too many people know that, but box elder can be tapped. You just need more sap to boil down to 1 gallon. Takes more gallons of sap to make a gallon of maple syrup. The younger trees are fairly smooth, not as gray as the red maple, but they're fairly similar. One of the main attributes about both the maples is that they have a branching structure that has opposite arrangement. So you have a branch, and then on one side of the twig there'll be one branch, and right on the opposite side will be another branch. So it's kind of almost a cross shape, and you can look up and kind of see that pattern. Trees look different depending on where they live. You can imagine a tree with full sunlight, growing well, good moisture, good nutrients. It's going to have bark that's really spreading, growing quickly, as opposed to a tree that's growing really slow. It's going to look a lot different than the fast-growing trees. One of the things that Erin's doing, looking at black walnut syrup, she's actually tapping very young trees from 1 inch in diameter to 5 inches in diameter. So those are very small. And the reason she's tapping those is those are trees that are not going to make it to large size. As we select trees to remain crop trees to grow as high quality veneer trees, which, black walnut's a very valuable wood, all these other trees kind of surrounding it, they're not going to make it. Because the bigger a tree gets, the more space it needs. So we're looking at these trees that will either be thinned out or just die out, and seeing if we can actually tap some sap out of those things and produce some syrup.
So black walnut, we know that it's the most high value timber species, definitely in West Virginia and definitely in North America as a whole. It's kind of a more scarce wood, which contributes to it being so high value. But it is a multi-purpose tree, so it has these other aspects or attributes, and one of them being syrup production, but then also it produces walnuts. So you can use those for, to eat themselves, but also in baking and cooking and all these other things. So it definitely has multiple revenue streams potentially. If you already have an existing sugaring operation, being able to add other trees in the mix is, I think, an exciting thing. And in Pendleton County and definitely certain parts of the state, walnut really thrives on these old agricultural lands, on limestone soils. So it can really be a kind of a value added thing for farmers and people who already have maybe those existing sugaring operations.
Next up, we go behind the scenes to learn more about the technology of maple syrup.
This is a modern sugar camp. You know, this is an educational facility, but also they'll also be out here boiling sap, and so this is kind of what it looks like. So we're very fortunate. It's a great facility for students to come out here and learn how to tap trees and learn about kind of the biology and the management of a sugar bush. There's all sorts of techniques and technology associated with a sugar bush like this one. You can see all the pipes, all the tubes, you know. And there's cool equipment that used to splice and put them together, put them into the trees, make connections, and so forth. Generally, they keep the main lines up all year. And then just recently, within the past 3 weeks, the students have been out here. You know, the students are part of a course that Dr. Jamie Schuler teaches. So we're very lucky here at West Virginia University to have this facility, this sugar bush and the sugar shack.
This sugar bush operation started in 2014 with a grant from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, especially crop block grant. And that's funneled through from some federal funding. They gave us the money to buy basically the equipment that you see out there, and the university put in some money for the buildings. The magical thing about making syrup, it's really not that difficult. All you do is boil a whole bunch of water. You know, at 2%, which a lot of people use as kind of that rough estimate, we have to have about 43 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. You know, our trees aren't quite as good here, or at least don't have quite the sugar content. And so we're probably boiling 53 gallons of water to get that 1 gallon of maple syrup. But effectively, what we're doing, and what all operations do, is just try to find efficient ways to remove that water. One of the reasons that we're out here is that this particular property has a fairly decent amount of sugar maple. It's our state tree. It's obviously one that's important for us as well. But just from a sheer number standpoint, we seem to have a lot more reds. But it's nice that this particular property has sugar maple. It tends to have a higher sugar content, which is why people prefer it. But effectively, what we're trying to do is provide a conduit to get the sap from the tree down to our sugar house. Okay, and that's basically what we're looking at here, is just kind of an elaborate plumbing system. This little spout here, this spile, there's a hole that's drilled into the tree, only about 2 inches deep. And we insert this spout into the tree, and that's just a little elbow basically. And that provides an opportunity for that sap to drip out into the spout, down this tube, into this long line that goes up and down the hill. And it just flows via gravity down the slope there, and we collect it into that tank. And so there's a pump way up on the farm, and we run about 1,000 feet of tubing that provides vacuum to this machine, which is called a releaser. And basically what that does is it allows vacuum to come into this machine, go up those lines. So we talked about those lines that come down the hill. This machine distributes that vacuum to those lines, and the sap runs down the hill through these lines here into this releaser. And what this basically does is it allows the vacuum and the sap to coexist. And so when the sap comes in here, it drains into this tank. There's a float in here. That float raises, and when it gets to a certain point, it dumps. And what that does is it temporarily cuts that vacuum off. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to dump that sap out of the tank. And so the sap dumps, we collect it into this big tank here. Once we get a sufficient amount, we'll run it through that reverse osmosis machine that we talked about. When we run it through the reverse osmosis, we'll then pump it into this upper tank. And this upper tank is what's connected to our evaporator. And so through this tubing system here, it goes into the other building, and that's where we'll start the boiling process. So most of the boiling takes place in this back pan, which is about 4 feet long, and ours is 2 feet wide. And then it comes into the front pan, which is what we call the syrup pan. And this is where we talked about that flavor development in maple syrup, and that's where a lot of it happens here. And so these two pans are connected via this pipe. And so when the sap is ready, it comes through this pipe and into this front box. And what you'll see is that it has a series of channels in there. And what will happen is, as that syrup changes density, it keeps getting moved forward and forward and forward. And so as that water or that sap in there evaporates, it it concentrates that syrup, and so as it evaporates, we get more water taking its place coming in behind. And so each one of those channels that you see in this pan is closer and closer to syrup, okay, as it evaporates out. Basically, the last part of this process is drawing off when it becomes syrup. And so syrup is legally syrup when it's 7.1 degrees above the boiling point of water. And so that changes depending on elevation. So water boils at 212 at sea level, and it probably boils about 210 here just because of our elevation. And so you add 7 degrees to that, and so it's about 217 or so, which would be when we would draw off. And so when we have our thermometer here, and so when we see that it's 217 or close to it, that's when we basically will open the valve and draw off the syrup from that pan. And once it's syrup, what we typically will do, what producers will do is then they'll run it through some sort of a filtration system just to clear out some of the sediment, a lot of the calcium, magnesium, some of those minerals that precipitate out during that boiling process. We just remove that because people don't want to taste that in their pancakes. So we just run that through a simple filter, and then it goes into a bottle and on a shelf somewhere.
And now we learn maple tapping 101.
So the basic process to tapping these trees, at least for our operation, we start out with long rolls of this 5/16 tubing, and we basically want to put a spout on it. And when we're using this tubing, it's really helpful to have some of these specialty tools. I call this the Red Lobster. It's the two-handled tool. And basically what this thing does is that it allows us to very easily put squeeze fittings onto this tubing. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to do by hand. And basically what we do is we just clamp the tubing in there, put the fitting in there, and essentially just squish it in there by using a little bit of force, and that stays in there just like that. Once we have the spout into the tube, then it's just simply drilling a hole into the tree. Now, in order to do this correctly, what you want to do is there's no reason to go more than 2 inches. And so we drill about 2 inches into the tree, which is only about that part of the bit. And we drill slightly uphill so that the sap at night, when it's not running anymore and it starts to freeze up, if we didn't drill upwards, it would kind of freeze in the back, and a lot of times it'll push that spout out. And so this allows it to drain a little bit better. And so just slightly uphill and 2 inches. I'll turn a little faster. If you have a good bit, it goes pretty quick. And then all you do is you take that spout and just tap it till you hear that thud, okay? What a lot of people tend to do is they tend to overdrive these spouts, and what happens is that those wood fibers will split open, and you've damaged the tree more than what that initial hole does. Now, what will happen is that this is connected to a tube, and that drains downhill. At the end of the year, what we do is we just come by, we pull these spouts out, and usually on a good healthy tree, that hole that we created, you can see that it's already dripping there, so we've got a good day for sap flow. That hole will heal over within the next year, and that's what we want to see. We want to see it healing over so we limit the amount of time that we have open wounds on these trees and things like that. Now, someone that wanted to do it in their backyard, as an example, that doesn't have all these fancy tools and things like that, you can still do it. You could go to Lowe's and buy a little bit of clear tubing. You can buy these fittings. These are about 25 cents. You can buy these online, 25 cents a piece. You can push with that clear tubing at Lowe's. You can push those on by hand and just have that run into a bucket or a milk jug or anything like that. It doesn't take an awful lot to do some collections. And for a few dollars, you can have a handful of trees down in your backyard.
Now that we have maple syrup, let's head over into the kitchen and make something tasty with Hannah.
Hi, Hi, welcome to the kitchen. My name is Hannah Fincham and I am the extension agent in Randolph County. And today we're going to be cooking with maple syrup. So if you're only using maple syrup at the breakfast table on your pancakes or waffles, you might be missing out because there's lots of great recipes to use with maple syrup. Today we are actually going to make a maple pear glaze for pork chops and a maple balsamic vinaigrette for our salad. So we're kind of making a whole meal with maple syrup. So the first thing we're gonna do is I already have 4 pork chops in my pan. The only thing I did was spray the pan with nonstick spray first, put it down. There's no salt and pepper or anything on it. So I'm gonna stick these in a 350-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, and while those are in the oven, we're gonna go ahead and make our sauce for the pork chops. So the first thing we're gonna need is 1.5 washed pears, which mine are already washed. So we are going to dice these. So I'm gonna cut down the sides so that we don't get the seeds or the core. And I'm just gonna chop. So we want our pear diced and washed with clean hands, of course, which is why I went ahead and did my pork ahead of time before you got here with me, because I wanted to wash my hands before I did all this other good stuff. So I have a saucepan right here beside me, and I'm gonna take my pears and put them in my saucepan. I lost one there, but that's okay. Goodness, I'm losing them all over. Okay, here we go. So this is 1 pear. And then I need a half of another pear. So then you're thinking, well, Hannah, what are you gonna do with the other half of your pear? Well, I'm gonna use it on a salad because if you haven't tried fresh fruit on salad, you're also missing out. So, so our salad today is gonna have the other half of this pear on it. All right, so we're gonna take all of our chopped and kind of diced pears there. I might do just, let's not quite half. Okay, but I'm gonna go ahead and chop up my whole pear, and I'm gonna put the rest of it in my salad. So I have a plate here already with a nice big mixed green salad. So I am going to, actually, I'll just leave it right here. And I'm going to put my pear on top of it. All right, so we're just gonna put that right there. I love the fresh fruit on the salads. We're just gonna put it all on there. But if you had another pear, if you're serving more than yourself, you can always split the pear between more than one person. Or if you have a third pear, you can do another pear for the rest of your folks. So now back to the sauce. We have all of our chopped pears in there. The next thing we need is 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And I love maple syrup, and our family buys it by the gallon. But can you imagine trying to pour maple syrup out of this big container? Well, we don't. So I have this nifty little pourer here for my maple syrup. It has a nice little, oh, if I do it right, it's the opposite way. So we are using 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. Okay. So our burner's not on yet. We're putting everything in here first. Okay. Then we need 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. So I have my little brown sugar in a little container here. There we go, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Then we're going to use a half a tablespoon of prepared mustard. I actually have a 1/2 tablespoon of mustard, but if you don't have a 1/2 tablespoon, it is 1½ teaspoons is what that is. All right, so we're gonna fill all this up with our mustard. Put our mustard in. And then we need a 1/2 tablespoon of margarine, which there's 1 tablespoon's already marked on there. So we're gonna use a 1/2. I'm gonna stick that in there. And we're gonna turn it on. So I'm gonna get my little pears out of here that I dropped. Okay, so we're gonna turn this on medium. And we are just gonna let it reduce until the pears start to release their juice. So kind of mixing everything up here a little bit. All right, now let's get to our dressing. If you haven't made your own salad dressing before, you can just make it in a mason jar, which is exactly what I'm going to do today. So the very first thing we're gonna need is olive oil. I have olive oil here. You can reduce the amounts of things. So I'm actually gonna cut my recipe in half. So I'm gonna use 1/2 cup of olive oil, and it's nicely sitting here flat so that I can make sure that I get the right amount. It's going a little slow, but here we go so you guys can see. Okay. So we have a 1/2 cup of olive oil, 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar. This one is new. Oh. I'm gonna stir this a little bit. It's getting a little juicy. And then we need balsamic vinegar next for our salad dressing. So we're gonna use 1/4 cup of this. So I can just pour it right in the same thing, and we're gonna add 1/4 cup. And then I need 1/8 cup of maple syrup. So I'm gonna get that back on there. Get the maple syrup back on again. And then we go. So we have almost a cup of dressing. But then I also have my jar here that we're gonna put it in and mix it. And it also calls for Dijon mustard this time. So we need 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard. And we're gonna put this right into our jar. We can also add a little bit of salt and pepper, but we'll do that after. So I'm gonna pour all my liquids in here. You can add a little bit of salt and pepper if you would like to your dressing. And then we are going to put a lid on it and shake. So now we have a beautiful maple balsamic vinaigrette for our salad. So I'm gonna go over here and stir my pears again. They are looking good. Now I thought probably chopped mine a little bit too big. I chopped them instead of diced them. So they're taking a little bit longer. But if you dice them up real small, you should be good. And I think our pork chops are ready to take out of the oven. So we're gonna put those down here to rest. And we wanna make sure that the internal temperature when we take them out of the oven is 160 degrees. So I'm gonna take its temperature real quick here with the, and if you are using a meat thermometer, you always wanna look for the notch and make sure the meat is covering the tip to the notch, or otherwise you're gonna be taking the temperature of the air. And you also don't wanna stick it straight down in the meat, you wanna put it in the side. So let's see here. All right, so I've got my straight down in my pork chop. Perfect, we're over 160. It's actually about 170. So we are all good to go there. Gonna keep stirring my pears. And then let's go back to our salad. So I already put the extra pears on top of my lettuce. Now I'm gonna show you some of my other favorite things that I love to add to my salads. If you have any kind of dried berry, a dried blueberry, cranberry, I think this is actually a mixture of both. I like to put dried fruit on my salad too. So we can just put a little bit of that. And then I have pecans. So just a few pecans. And then I either use blue cheese or feta cheese. And I have feta cheese here with me right now. All right. I have my pretty syrup that I just made. I can drizzle. Look at that, it's so pretty. Guys, just takes a little bit, because it's so beautiful. I'm gonna set that to the side. And then I am going to get a pork chop. And I'm gonna get some sauce out of my pears, my pear sauce. As I said, mine is a little chunky because I didn't dice it, I chopped it. So make sure to dice it. And we're just gonna put a nice little sauce. And if you need to add a little bit of water, you can. And there you go. We have a pork chop with maple pear sauce and a beautiful salad with maple balsamic vinaigrette. So I hope you'll experiment in your kitchen with maple syrup because it goes far beyond the breakfast table. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for joining us today on the Sugar Bush. We'll see you next time on WVU Extension Today. Bye-bye.